My calendar was usually noisy alerts, follow-ups, last-minute escalations, but that morning, an entire block had been wiped clean. No cancellations, no explanations, just empty space where decisions usually lived. In my role, silence meant someone had already decided something without me. I was still staring at the gap when my assistant forwarded a message from Caleb Hartman, the Chief Operating Officer. No subject line, one sentence. Conference C. Don't be late. I want to emphasize one thing. This story contains dramatized elements and uses narrative tools, including AI assistance, to convey emotional and educational insight about workplace realities. If this isn't something you'd like to continue listening to, please feel free to pause, get some rest, and look after your well-being. When I arrived, Caleb was already there, standing at the head of the table. He didn't offer a seat. That told me more than the message had. "You're in your final week," he said, as if we were confirming the weather, so we're accelerating the transition. He gestured toward the door. Evan Brooks walked in, clutching a notebook he'd never needed before. My intern, bright, careful, still learning which questions could break things if asked at the wrong time. "You'll begin handing over your responsibilities to Evan today," Caleb continued. Full operational scope. I looked down at the handover document he slid across the table. My name appeared once. At the top. Evan's name filled every task beneath it. I didn't speak. Caleb filled the space for me. Processes are documented. Anyone can run them. Anyone. Evan was introduced as the future of the department. I was reframed as support during transition. One phrase to justify a promotion. One phrase to justify removing a senior salary before the quarter closed. I didn't argue. I never had. I built systems that worked quietly. I designed the final decision framework, the last filter, before risk became loss. Executives trusted it without understanding it. My name was never attached. That was the arrangement. This isn't personal. Soren, Caleb added. It's efficiency. I spent the afternoon walking Evan through dashboards, approval paths, and the logic beneath the logic. He wrote everything down like instructions, not judgment. When he asked why something existed, Caleb cut in. Stick to what's written. At 4:16, my phone vibrated. Company-wide email. Temporary signing authority reassigned. Effective immediately. I didn't react. I just sat there shocked, irritated, and perfectly still, holding everything in. If this moment feels uncomfortably familiar, take a breath with me. How are you holding up right now? And where are you listening from? If stories like this resonate, consider subscribing so we can keep telling them together. Because the next decision comes faster than anyone expects. By the second day, the unfairness stopped pretending to be subtle. I watched Caleb Hartman boast before the board, selling a vision of speed, youth, and flexibility as if those qualities were inventions. He praised Evan as proof that the next generation could move faster by thinking less. I sat there, silent, remembering the disasters that never happened. I remembered the contracts that were never signed because I delayed them, the approvals I rerouted, the midnight calls where I said no when everyone else wanted yes. I had saved this company more times than anyone would ever document, not by bold action, but by restraint. Nothing exploding had become my job. Evan began repeating my words in meetings. He talked about downstream exposure, hidden risk, and second-order consequences, but he delivered them like memorized lines, detached from weight. When someone challenged him, he looked to Caleb. When Caleb nodded, the caution disappeared. Caleb loved the optics. He told the board mentorship was working. He smiled and said, I had prepared Evan perfectly. You taught him well, he said, proud, as if replacing me was proof of leadership. That was when the bitterness set in. I realized my patience had protected Evan from pressure. I had corrected his mistakes before anyone noticed. I had made the work look easy by absorbing its difficulty. Kindness, I learned, creates illusions. Illusions invite shortcuts. Late that afternoon, a routing decision appeared. Small, time-sensitive, Evan hesitated for a second, then approved it early, just to speed things up. Caleb said. The room moved on. I stayed still, tasting something sharp. The system did not fail, but the pause was gone. And absence has a way of speaking. I suspected it would answer louder soon than anyone in that room expected that night ahead. On the third day, the problem didn't announce itself as a mistake. It arrived as a perfectly formatted email. Evan's first decision followed every documented step. The approvals were routed correctly, the thresholds respected, the language clean and compliant. On paper, it was flawless. In context, it was wrong. It ignored timing, market tension, and the quiet signals that never make it into policy manuals. I saw the email when it hit my inbox, CC'd to the entire executive group, subject line neutral, tone confident. I read it twice, then a third time, searching for the missing hesitation. It wasn't there. I said nothing. Silence, at that point, was still considered professionalism. Caleb replied within minutes. Short, affirming, good execution. He followed it with the line he'd been using all week. We trust the system. That sentence landed heavier than the decision itself. The system had never been meant to replace judgment. It was designed to slow people down, not absolve them. But the moment it produced something that looked right, it became untouchable. I watched the logic trap close. Each step justified the next. No one wanted to be the person who questioned a process they had already praised. Evan relaxed visibly. He had done everything correctly. That was the problem. I drafted a response and deleted it. Then another. Then none. Intervening now would look emotional, territorial. I had already been reframed as transitional noise, so I waited, measuring the distance between correctness and consequence. An hour later, a partner replied, one line, polite, careful, requesting a secondary confirmation before proceeding. The message sat unanswered. No alerts, no follow-ups. The executives had moved on to the next meeting. Evan assumed silence meant approval. Caleb didn't look back. I felt the unease settle deeper. Controlled and quiet. The decision still stood. The process still looked clean. And somewhere between those facts, a gap widened, unnoticed, waiting to be crossed. Nothing screamed failure yet, which made the waiting worse, because I knew systems rarely collapse loudly at first. They erode quietly, while everyone congratulates themselves for being so efficiently correct. By midweek, the tension stopped feeling abstract and settled into my body. There was a step in the workflow that never appeared in any document. I had added it years ago, quietly, after watching a perfectly legal decision nearly collapse a partnership before final activation. I paused and checked one thing, not numbers, but tone. How quickly replies came back, which names were absent, whether silence meant agreement or unease. It took minutes. It saved millions. That pause wasn't written down because it couldn't be. It required context, memory, and the willingness to slow everyone else down. Evan skipped it. I don't see it in the checklist, he said, scrolling, genuinely confused. He wasn't reckless. He was obedient to the page in front of him. To him, absence meant irrelevance. Caleb noticed the delay anyway. He leaned into the doorway. Impatient. We're closing the quarter, he said. We don't need extra hesitation. Let's keep things moving. I considered speaking. I imagined explaining an invisible safeguard to people who only trusted what they could audit. I imagined the looks, the labels, overcautious, territorial, legacy thinking. So I stayed quiet. If you've ever watched something drift toward trouble while everyone else applauded efficiency, you know the feeling. That tightness where logic says wait, but authority says go. Caleb approved the timeline. Evan followed it. The system progressed exactly as designed, minus the pause that gave it meaning. By late afternoon, the building emptied, lights dimmed, status indicators flipped from active to idle. I packed nothing and left nothing behind. At 8:30 p.m., the transaction went live. No meeting, No call, just automated confirmation rolling through servers after hours. When no one was paid to worry, I read the alert at home. Standing in my kitchen, phone glowing in the dark. Everything looked correct, compliant, final. The pause was gone, and with it, the last chance to ask whether moving faster was actually moving forward. That question hung there, unanswered, as the night settled in. And I wondered how many people would notice before morning arrived, and what it would cost them. That night felt deceptively calm. The office was dark, the executive floor empty, glass walls reflecting nothing but exit lights and unanswered confidence. No one was logged into the command room. No last-minute calls. No emergency threads. The kind of quiet leadership loves because it looks like control. At home, I tried to ignore my phone. I had done my handover. I had said nothing. The system was no longer mine. Still, years of habit kept my attention tuned to patterns. Waiting for the first deviation, it came quietly. An automated notification vibrated against the table. Routine language, neutral tone. The system acknowledging an activation exactly as designed. No warnings, no flags, just confirmation that a process had completed successfully. I sat there, reading it twice. The architecture was behaving perfectly. Which was the problem? Without judgment in the loop. Speed replaced sense. The safeguards assumed someone would hesitate. No one did. Minutes later, another alert arrived, then another. Each one clean. Each one technically correct. The system was cascading forward, stacking consequences faster than any human review could interrupt. I imagined the executive floor, still empty, approvals firing in the dark, servers humming, dashboards glowing, decisions executing themselves, because that was what efficiency looked like when people went home. I didn't intervene. I couldn't. Authority had already been reassigned. Silence, by now, was no longer a choice. It was policy. The numbers updated. At first, they were manageable. Marginal exposure, acceptable variance, the kind of figures Caleb would wave away in the morning. Then they doubled. Then doubled again. Momentum took over. The way it always does, once restraint is removed. I felt the storm gathering without a sound. No alarms, no shouting, just arithmetic accelerating in a vacuum. By the time the third alert hit, the total was no longer abstract. It had weight, direction, velocity. I locked my phone and set it down. The night was still quiet. Too quiet. Somewhere downtown. The company was losing money precisely the way it had been programmed to, and no one was there to ask it to stop in time. By 11:40, the number stopped being theoretical. The dashboard refreshed and locked, the way it only does when accounting has already spoken. $96 million. Recorded, finalized. No italics, no warning color, just a clean line item that said the damage was real. My phone lit up immediately. "Why are you seeing this?" someone asked, breathless. "Is this correct?" another voice demanded. No one said hello. No one asked how I was. Panic doesn't waste manners. I stayed quiet, listening to the chaos stack itself. Calls overlapped. Executives spoke over each other, searching for a lever that still existed, somewhere in the noise. Caleb's voice cut through, sharp and urgent. "Roll it back," he said. "Just reverse the activation." Silence followed. Then a weaker voice answered. Careful and precise. "We can't." The process completed. "The dependencies are locked." "That's not acceptable." Caleb snapped. "Find a way." There wasn't one. The system had done exactly what it was designed to do once it was allowed to run without interruption. Rollback was a human concept. Automation didn't understand regret. I watched the numbers stabilize. Then branch. Secondary exposures surfaced, small at first, then multiplying as linked positions reacted. The 96 million was only what had already been captured. It was the visible part. "Who approved this?" someone asked. No one answered. Approval had been distributed so cleanly it belonged to everyone, and no one at the same time. Caleb tried again, his tone shifting. Soren, you're familiar with this architecture. I didn't respond. Not out of spite, out of accuracy. Familiarity without authority is just memory. Before midnight, the line item stopped updating. Accounting had frozen it. Official loss recorded. I sat there, detached, feeling the cold clarity settle in. They were focused on the number, because numbers feel containable. They hadn't realized yet that this was only the direct hit. The rest hadn't reported in. It would take hours for the indirect damage to surface. Contracts tightening, trust thinning, consequences waking quietly. By then, explanations would matter less than the absence that allowed everything to accelerate unchecked that night onward. By morning, the decision had hardened into policy. Caleb's first instruction came through a group message marked urgent but oddly polite. Do not contact Soren. We handle this internally. Leadership credibility mattered more to him than speed. And speed had already cost them $96 million. I wasn't surprised. I had watched Caleb protect appearances for years. He believed authority weakened the moment it admitted dependence. So he sealed me off, like evidence that complicated the narrative. Evan unraveled quickly. His confidence evaporated as questions multiplied. He paced between desks, rereading logs, whispering apologies to no one in particular. Every alert felt personal now. Every silence felt accusatory. In the executive call, someone finally asked the question I had been waiting for. Why wasn't this flagged? The room went quiet. No one answered immediately, because the answer required admitting they had ignored the wrong absence. Caleb spoke instead. He blamed timing, complexity, market volatility, anything abstract enough to sound intelligent. Evan stared at the table, knuckles white. If you're listening and you've ever watched leadership choose pride over clarity, you already know what happens next. Feel free to decide whether silence is loyalty or fear. I had my answer. An analyst broke protocol and searched the archive. Minutes later, an old thread surfaced. My name, a warning sent months earlier, outlining the exact scenario now unfolding. Clear language, specific risk, a recommendation to pause. Someone read it out loud. The call shifted, not loudly, just enough. Caleb stopped talking. Legal asked for timestamps. Compliance asked who had acknowledged the message. It was too late. The email proved awareness, not prevention. The damage had already posted. Trust doesn't rewind just because proof appears. Evan looked up then, eyes wide, finally understanding the weight I used to carry quietly. Caleb ended the call abruptly. I closed my laptop. Bitterness sharp but clean. They hadn't called me, not because I couldn't help, but because help would have exposed how avoidable the loss had always been. And that realization lingered, heavier than anger, settling into the room long after the screens went dark completely. By the afternoon, the collapse stopped pretending to be contained. The first call came from a partner we'd worked with for over a decade. Polite voice, careful wording. We're placing all related agreements on hold until further notice. No accusation, just distance. Others followed, one by one, freezing extensions, suspending renewals, stepping back without drama. Inside the company, systems reacted faster than people. Automated dependencies detected risk exposure and shut themselves down exactly as programmed. Dashboards grayed out, queues stalled, processes that relied on trust, timing, and continuity simply stopped. No alarms, just absence. Caleb tried to project control. This is temporary, he said in a clipped update. Let's stay calm. But calm doesn't propagate when confidence is gone. Each halted system triggered another review, another pause, another silent withdrawal. The numbers kept moving, loss projections updated hourly, then continuously. 96 million became a reference point, not a total. Secondary penalties surfaced, missed milestones converted into fees. Opportunities evaporated because timing had been the product. The damage spread outward, contractual and reputational, touching areas no one had thought to model. I watched from the edge, no longer involved, yet still fluent in what I was seeing. This was the architecture behaving honestly, remove judgment, and it reveals consequences at scale. Late that evening, an email arrived from legal. Subject line precise. Individual accountability review. They requested timelines, acknowledgements, decision owners, names, not departments, people, not processes. Someone replied all, asking who had final oversight. The question hung there longer than it should have. I closed the message and exhaled slowly. The chain reaction had reached its final stage. The loss was no longer abstract, no longer shared. It was about to become personal. By then, blame had narrowed, patience had expired, and the silence that once protected leadership turned inward, pressing hard, demanding names, signatures, and explanations that no spreadsheet or process could absorb without consequences anymore for anyone involved. The room felt different when the question finally surfaced. No one raised their voice. No one pointed fingers yet. It came from the chair at the far end of the table, calm and delayed, the way serious questions usually arrive after damage has already settled. Who designed this system? He asked. The screen froze. Not technically, but socially. People looked down at notes they didn't need. Someone cleared their throat. I wasn't in the room, but I knew the silence. I had lived inside it for years. My name was said carefully. Soren Lane, not blamed, not praised, just identified. Caleb shifted in his seat. He tried to speak. Instinctively, like authority always does when it feels itself slipping. The legal counsel raised a hand without looking at him. Let's hear from compliance first. Caleb stopped. For the first time since this began, he was no longer steering the conversation. They pulled up the architecture summary, the decision scaffolding, the pause points, the safeguards that assumed a human would still be present. Suddenly, the design wasn't abstract anymore. It had authorship. Someone asked if I could clarify intent. That was when HR interrupted. Voice thin. Soren's contract ended last week. The room went quiet again. But this time, it wasn't confusion. It was realization. No obligation, no authority, no duty to explain what had already been dismissed as unnecessary. I felt something settle. Not relief, but alignment. The system had been questioned, the truth located, and the responsibility exposed without me saying a word. They had wanted efficiency without dependence. They had gotten consequences without guidance. By the time the meeting adjourned, my role was clear in retrospect. I had built something meant to be respected, not rushed. And now, finally, the people who erased me understood exactly what had been removed, and why no one could simply ask me to fix it anymore. Justice arrived quietly, late, and unmistakably. The news reached me quietly, the way final decisions usually do. Caleb Hartman resigned before noon, framed publicly as a leadership failure rooted in poor judgment. No press conference, no farewell email. His name vanished from the org chart faster than it had appeared, replaced by an interim title and silence. Evan disappeared too. Not fired. Officially, just removed. His access revoked. His name scrubbed from documentation. His future reassigned somewhere far from decisions. He became a lesson no one wanted to reference. No one called me to return. No one asked for help. They didn't need to. The damage was done. An understanding arrived too late to be useful. I cleared my desk without witnesses, left my badge on the counter, and walked out without looking back. Outside, the city moved on. Traffic flowed. Coffee shops stayed open. Companies kept pretending control was permanent. I felt no triumph, only a steady, quiet satisfaction. Justice hadn't arrived with anger or apology. It arrived as accounting entries, resignations, and erased names. That was the cost of believing experience was optional. The math was clear. They didn't lose $96 million that night. They lost the person who kept them from losing more. When I look back on everything that happened, the lesson isn't about revenge or winning. It's about what happens when experience is treated like excess weight instead of quiet infrastructure. I didn't lose my role because I failed. I lost it because the work I did made failure invisible. And when invisibility is mistaken for simplicity, collapse becomes inevitable. Living through that moment taught me something human and uncomfortable. Sometimes your value is proven not by what you do, but by what breaks when you're gone. That realization doesn't come with applause. It comes with silence, late nights, and the slow understanding that dignity doesn't need permission. If you stayed with me until the end of this story, thank you. Take a second now, loosen your shoulders, breathe, maybe get a glass of water or stand up and stretch your back. Stories like this carry weight, even when they're told calmly. I'm curious, where are you listening from right now? And more importantly, did any part of this feel familiar to you? If it did, feel free to leave a comment. Sharing your perspective might help someone else feel less alone. If you found value here, a like or a share quietly keeps these stories alive. And if you want to stay for the next one, you know where the subscribe button is. Some lessons deserve to be remembered.